Hey, welcome to Theology Unbound. I'm your host, Jordan. We're glad you tuned in for another episode of Perspectives. We have decided to title all of the interviews that I have done with different guests, Perspectives. We are a podcast that is passionately committed to fostering unity in the church and growing each of us in our theological understandings. And we do this by embracing different perspectives. In our series, Perspectives, we don't bring on our guests to challenge them. We don't bring on our guests to debate them, but we bring them on that they can share their unique insights and experiences and traditions, creating a space where understanding and connection can thrive. We firmly believe that unity is not only possible, but essential, even amidst our disagreements. For unity does not mean uniformity. Our differences in perspective are not barriers, but opportunities to grow in love and mutual respect, working together as one body in Christ, despite our diverse viewpoints. We encourage you, our listener, to hold fast to your own perspective while remaining open to uniting with brothers and sisters of differing views. Remember, the body of Christ is made up of many parts, each uniquely crafted and used by Him to build His kingdom. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It's with a pastor named Ed Kemp, who's been doing pastoral ministry for roughly 35 plus years and is continuing to be a pastor's pastor in his retired age. We talked about a lot of things, from church growth to some concerns and his perspective on what he thinks might be wrong with the church today and how we can address those issues. I hope you enjoy and are blessed. Alrighty. Well, today I get the blessed opportunity to interview another seasoned longtime pastor who was pastor at Gateway Church in Visalia. I think, is that right? Visalia?
That is correct.
Yeah. So this is pastor, or formerly pastor, Ed Kemp. I'm sure he's still carrying the pastoral role, of course. And he has joined us today to just impart some of the wisdom and years of ministry. Ed, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Look forward to talking.
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit beforehand, just the format of the show. We like to get to know the person. So we'll just start with, your early years or when you became a Christian, what that looked like. Obviously you're probably a Christian before you were called into ministry, I'm guessing. So we could start there.
Yeah. Well, I was raised in a very, very, very nominal Christian home. We never went to church except a few times. If you were to ask my parents, they would have definitely said they were Christians. But I was raised as the most ignorant Christian in the world, so I would not claim I was a Christian. Mm-hmm. And I went away to college and really realized that there's got to be more to life than what my family experienced. And took a girl out, this girl that swam on the swim team and was a scorekeeper for water polo, and I did both of those. And so asked her out on a date, and on our second date, walked her to the door of her house, and she said, "Hey, I can't go out with you anymore. I'll see you later. Bye." And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Well, tell me why. Well, I go to church. You don't. And I said, take me to church with you. Yeah. And she was such an evangelist. I mean, just a tremendously gifted evangelist. She said in exactly these words and exactly this tone, "You want to go to church with me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to." And we went, and it was kind of a Calvary Chapel style. It was an Assembly of God church, but very much.
Were you in California? Is that where you were born?
I was in California, in the Visalia area, where I finished my ministry. We grew up there and went to junior college there, then left for 35 years, and then the last 12 years came back to Visalia and pastored a church there for the last 12 years. And so she took me to church. I became a believer, which just scared her parents to death because her dad was raised by parents who were missionaries in China with the China Inland Mission,
Okay.
Hudson Taylor's organization. They were further inland than any other missionaries have ever been in China.
Oh, wow.
And so her dad was a very committed Christian, an elder in his church, a very, very conservative guy, raised in an English boarding school, very stoic, very stiff upper lip kind of guy. And I am not that in any way, shape, or form.
It sounds a little bit intimidating.
Yeah, so I scared him to death. And I think after we'd been married about 10 years and I had become a pastor, that he was pretty satisfied I was going to hang around. And so I went to church, became a believer, proposed to Cindy. We got married when we were 20 years old, and we've been married almost 48 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's always an encouraging thing to hear and see couples that have been faithful to their marriage covenant for nearly half a century.
Yeah, when we got married, not only did we not know anything, we didn't even suspect anything. I mean, we were just total immature, naive kids, and God has just been gracious.
Did you guys continue? Did you continue going to college after that?
I did, yeah. Went to Occidental College for a very short period of time, and then transferred down to University of California, Irvine, and finished a criminology degree.
Okay, so you were planning on forensic science?
No, I was going to be a college PE teacher, and I was a springboard diver, really.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to coach and work in a college atmosphere.
Yeah.
We went down to Irvine, had a friend down there by the name of Milan Yurkovich. He wasn't really a friend. He was a friend of a friend, and he planted a church in Mission Viejo just a couple of years after Rick Warren, in fact. And Milan was down there, and so we just jumped into his church plant, and he got up one Sunday morning and said, anybody that wants to study the Bible with me, show up at my house at 5:30 on Thursday morning. And Milan and I met for the next 7 years.
Wow. Wow, that turned into something really good then.
Oh, it was awesome. It was
5:30 in the morning is early. That's a good commitment.
That's a commitment.
Yeah.
And Milan and I are still friends to this day. We just saw them a while back, and every chance we get back to Southern California, we visit.
So while you were going to college and you had these aspirations and desires to be a coach and to work with college students and all of that, did you feel like a tugging, or was there a calling on your life then that you recognized that you were going to go into ministry?
The first church I ever attended right after becoming a Christian, I thought about going to a Bible college because I sat in church Sunday after Sunday, and I went because I wanted to do something, you know. So about 2 months after I became a Christian, I started a Bible study with athletes at the junior college, and I had about 10 guys coming to my house, and we were listening to Chuck Smith tapes, and that was our Bible study. And then we'd sit around and talk about it for a half hour. But I would sit in church and go, nobody in here gets to do anything except the guy up front. And so I told Cindy, hey, I think I might want to be the guy up front. And she came from a ministry background where there were some real serious hardships when you raise your kids in the China Inland Mission in the early 1900s,
Right.
And some of her aunts and uncles and cousins bore a few scars from that, and she did not have a great penchant for wanting to be a pastor's wife. And so she said, well, get your college degree. And I was a diver. I wanted to dive, and Christian colleges don't like Speedos. And so I ended up at University of California, Irvine, and I dove for the Mission Viejo Nadadores.
Oh, all right. So you spent a few years doing that.
Yeah.
So did she just finally come around to you being a pastor?
Yeah. As Milan and I met, and as we went to church and I served in the church, she saw that this is really the road that God had laid out for us. And so she had many talks with Milan's wife, Kay, and Kay was really super gracious and supportive. And so finally, Milan said to me, you need to think about ministry. And So I started actually taking Bible classes at night while I was going to UCI.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd take 15 units at UCI and then take 6 units at a Bible college. And
What was the Bible college?
it was a little place called Grace Bible Institute. It was in Long Beach. Dave Hawking was the pastor of the church in Long Beach, and he had a
Okay,
little
yeah.
Bible college and a little seminary there. So Mylan had gone through that college, and so I just jumped in and started taking a couple classes there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Dave Hawking, phenomenal Bible teacher.
Yeah.
We did have a connection with one of our elders that was here for a while, and he was a big fan of David Hawking because he was at that specific church for a while too. You know,
Yeah.
The Southern California during the Jesus movement must have been just phenomenal. I mean, people are just coming to Christ left and right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of church planting.
Yeah. So did you continue on your education in the Bible from that small Bible college?
Yeah, I finished at UCI, enrolled at Talbot Seminary, did an MDiv in New Testament at Talbot Seminary. And then about 20 years later, I went back to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and did a Doctor of Ministries degree in preaching with Dr. Haddon Robinson.
Wow. So what, if you don't mind me asking, what did you write your thesis on?
For my master's of divinity?
Yeah.
Zero, nothing.
Oh, you didn't have to write one?
At that point in time, Talbot said, you can either write a thesis or you can take an extra 6 units of classwork. Well,
okay.
that was a no-brainer, man. I didn't want to write. There was no such thing as a computer. You had a typewriter, and I didn't even have an electric typewriter, and I was not going to write a thesis.
Yeah, it's kind of different now because writing has become so easy with the advances of technology. You know, even with footnotes and everything, they just got my bib, and you just go in and you can search the book, and it makes your footnote, and it's really just a copy paste game at that point.
Yeah, you people make me sick.
Yeah. Hey, if it makes you feel any better, I still don't like writing the papers.
Yeah.
I just finished up writing one for it was Christian ethics, and we were going through Norman Geisler's book, and he wanted a 10-page paper on an ethical issue, and it was it was hard fought. I didn't want to write it, but I got an A on it, so he was an easy teacher.
Well, I'm surprised they're still using the book. I read that 30, 40 years ago.
It's all still very applicable today, if not even more today, because of the issues that are going on in culture. It's very, very insightful and applicable. I loved it. I enjoyed it very much. Yeah. So, okay, well, let's talk about then. You're married. How long had you been married by the time you started pastoring?
Well, we got married when we were 20. I graduated seminary, at 27, 26. And
did you have any kids yet?
Huh?
Did you have any kids yet?
No. Okay. We waited till I was done with seminary before we attempted. Yeah. And so our first child, Nicholas, was born in 84. Okay. And we spent a couple of years at a church in Southern California in the Long Beach area as an associate pastor. And then my first church that I pastored, we moved to Auburn up above Sacramento in the foothills. Mm-hmm. And so our first son was about a year and a half when we moved up there. And then we had our 2 girls while we lived in Auburn.
So, so you have three altogether.
Got 3 kids and 2 grandsons.
All right. Yeah. So you got your hands full, of course, with the grandsons, and I'm sure they're a delight.
Oh yeah. A lot of fun.
When I talk to the grandparents in the congregation, they say nothing is like having the grandkids, because at the end of the night, they go home with mom and dad and you get to sleep peacefully in your bed.
Yeah, we've done a couple of overnighters,
Yeah, of course.
Anniversaries and some of that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun. We've just had a lot of fun.
I am I'm preaching tonight on the life of Joseph, and obviously God put Joseph in these different seasons of life to prepare him for the next season, right? And it's just this culmination of Joseph eventually being second in command of Egypt. So when you were an associate pastor, what were some of the things that God was preparing you for? I know that, I'm a young minister, so I'm learning as I go, but there's definitely challenges in the ministry, and as you get closer to being the senior pastor, there's a lot of hard lessons that have to be learned at times.
Well, I think that I don't know if I think the hard part of ministry is starting off at 25 years of age. I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right.
It's just the things you don't know, and the hard. It's hard to empathize with people who are 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than you. You really don't understand the depth of their feelings and their spiritual commitments that people, when they were in their 20s, pastors told them this is really important, and now it's not important anymore. And just generational divides.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah.
Creates stress. And so I don't know that being an associate pastor helped me prepare for stress. I think it gave me some skills that seminary didn't give me, like how to do a budget and how to organize and how to lead committees and groups, and just the tangible, practical things you have to do every day. You can't really learn those in a seminary. You kind of learn them by doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. The first Bible college I went to was a very practical 9-month long. We did go through the whole Bible. It was Calvary Chapel oriented. So I listened to probably the exact same Chuck tracks that you listened to back in the 70s. We stacked chairs. That's always the practical part of ministry is the church would have its main church service in what was a gymnasium, and you had to stack the chairs and then get the chairs out every Sunday. So,
and when you're a senior pastor, oftentimes you do the same thing.
Right. That's true. Yeah. I think that people get a misnomer that when you become a senior pastor, all you have to do is study the Bible and preach.
Well, and if you're wise and smart, you get into the ditch and dig with the other people in the church and don't, I've watched guys, I'm kind of above stacking chairs. I don't stack chairs. I'm the senior pastor, blah, blah, blah. And,
right.
I just, I don't think people respect leadership unless you're willing to get in the ditch and dig. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really, really practical and something that I'm just continuing to learn as a young minister. I mean, fortunately, I'm not 25. I'm getting a little bit closer to 40. I'm 38, but I still, I'm pretty young in ministry. I've only been doing it for just under 10 years. So I'm still learning a lot, It's
That's just great.
And me and my wife, we do worship. And what you were hitting on there with the generational gap, that is actually really such a good word. Even just having you say it, empathizing and understanding when it comes to music, that's a huge one. The difference between traditional and then, modern hymns and what worship music means to each person. And that's one of the things I'm learning.
Well, and a lot of, some of the child raising years, for us, I think our kids, kindergarten through 10th grade, you do a lot of family stuff, and you have a lot of memories that surround worship and music and church and Christmas Eve and Easter. And you just kind of get, and it happens to everybody, you just kind of get locked into that season a lot of times. And the more legalistic a person is, the more they get locked in, the more flexible someone can be with different worship styles, then the easier it's going to be to transition.
Mm-hmm. Have you had to, no doubt the answer to this is yes, but navigate your congregation through issues like that with the generational gaps?
Oh yeah. I planted 2 churches. And I pastored a church. My first church that I pastored, we celebrated our 125-year anniversary. It was a typical First Baptist church. Mm-hmm. There were 86 people there when I got there. And so you had to navigate all the choir, starting a contemporary service, all of that jazz. And in the last church I pastored, for the last 12 years, we celebrated our 150th anniversary as a church. And some of those issues had been already navigated because they had a early service with a choir and orchestra. And when I say choir and orchestra, there were 100 people in the choir and 50 people in the orchestra. I mean, it was
Wow.
a major music program. But because they were a church that had a very dynamic music program and were always trying to get out in the community and were willing to be innovative. They started a contemporary service before I got there, and then they started a Thursday night service because a lot of people would leave for the weekend and go to the coast or go to a football game or a baseball game or whatever. And so we had a Thursday night service, and we were running, like 1,800 in attendance, and we'd have about 125 on Thursday night because half of the group chose Thursday night because they worked on the weekend, and half of the group were there because they were going to be gone for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were some kind of innovative parts to the church, and it made it easier to try new things because they were used to trying new things.
Yeah. That's seems like one of the bigger challenges is the, the old saying, well, this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
So the moving in the direction of new things can be challenging, especially if you're lacking empathy for the people and seeing where they're at, mentally and emotionally and even physically in age.
Well, I think one of the greatest lessons I learned very, very early, it was the very first year I was a pastor, senior pastor, and I asked, I think it was Bill Butterworth. He lived up in Nevada City, and I was living in Auburn, and I said, hey, would you come to my church on this weekend and do a family life conference? Talk to us about marriage and parenting and finances and raising kids and all that stuff. And so we did a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, because people would hear him on Sunday morning and say, oh, I want to hear this guy again. Come back Sunday night and come back Monday night. And so we did that format. And it was really interesting. This older gal, I did her funeral service while I was there. She was probably 75 at the time. And when the conference was over at the end of Monday night, everybody was leaving. She was one of the last people to leave. And she came up to me and she goes, Pastor Ed, that was the best revival I've ever been to. Mm-hmm. She's using a word that she used, 55, 60, 70 years ago, right, which we wouldn't call a revival. We call it a family life conference. Mm-hmm. But to a large degree, the reason we did a family life conference is because people with marriage problems that didn't attend church would come to church and hear some solutions. And most of the time they weren't believers. And so, we had a time to make decisions to follow Christ, and we had people make decisions. And she called it a revival, and we called it a family life conference. And, I thought, couching things the right way so people grasp the real motivation of what you're doing is important.
Yeah, that's so good. So how old were you when you stepped into the senior pastor role?
Let's see, that would have been 1986. And
just so you know, that was a year before I was born.
Yeah. Well, it was just the year after I was born. So that works out well.
Yeah, starting off young.
I was 29.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's young still, in your 20s and pastoring a church, especially a 125-year-old First Baptist church.
Yeah.
I'm sure
and I spent a lot of years with Milan being his volunteer associate pastor. I led worship and did other things, led a college group, then I led a young marrieds group. And so I did a lot of associate pastor kind of things before I was ever paid for it.
Yeah. So when you were a pastor, maybe walk us through something that, some of your harder challenges of pastoring, or some of the difficulties, maybe not necessarily for you personally, but some of the difficulties that you've had to walk churches through.
Well, musical change, going to multiple services, challenging people to do outreach. I served for 8 years with Ray Johnson in Sacramento Bayside Church, and Ray is a huge invitational evangelist. Go out and invite everybody. And so teaching a church how to do that and challenging a church to do that, lots of people, the pastor will get up and preach a message on evangelism and inviting people to receive Christ, and everybody goes, yay, and then nobody does anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ray bridged that gap and created invite cards, and I was doing that already before I went to Bayside, but I really saw it fleshed out and had life breathed into it by the example of the staff and the motivation of the staff and the desire of the staff to model what they were asking other people to do. And so I've always believed in invitational evangelism. I just think that the average Christian in a church doesn't feel like they have the theological or doctrinal chops to be able to talk to people largely. But the average person says, well, I could invite somebody, give them an invite card. And so I would just try to come up with creative ways to use this thing. Just leave it at Starbucks, put it in a shopping cart, hand it to somebody and say, hey, I'd love to invite you to my church. And so getting people to really grasp onto that and live it out, that's one of the most challenging things. Churches oftentimes don't follow, I think, because they don't see results.
Yeah.
If you can challenge people to be invitational and all of a sudden people start showing up, well, that excites, people. We've set a goal and now we're achieving it. There's nothing better than that in a church. So my vision statement at the last church I was at is we want to invite everybody in the Visalia region to cross the threshold of Gateway and hear the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
We can set a goal of 30 decisions in a year. Well, that wasn't really my desire. My desire was to invite everybody to church. Mm-hmm. And so I got up one time. We had, for about 3 years in a row, we had over 500 visitors a year. And when you get up with a ream of paper and go, here's all the invite cards from the last year. This is how you guys are succeeding in inviting people in.
Yeah.
We're not responsible for everybody making decisions. That's their business, but we can present the gospel and we can ask them for a decision at the end of the service. Yeah. And so I think that's the hardest thing, is to get everybody believes the church has two purposes: edification and evangelism. Mm-hmm. How you doing with edification? Everybody does great. You read the Bible, you study the Bible, you use the Bible, you go to worship, you sing worship songs, you grow in your faith, you give, you love, you develop the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, everybody's great at discipleship, but very few places are good at evangelism. Mm-hmm. And so making evangelism easy and seeing it be successful, and seeing people come across the threshold and try this place out, that's far more difficult. And I think that's the biggest obstacle to overcome in a church. The other stuff, the music stuff, the multiple service stuff, that's always going to be there. There's always going to be those kinds of changes. But getting to the heart of what the church is supposed to be about, the most vital thing, we're supposed to be a hospital for hurting people. Jesus came to seek and save that which is lost. And getting a church to do that is a big, big chore.
Did you get to see more and more fruit of that as time went on?
Yeah, we really did. I borrowed a technique that many, many pastors have used. It's not original with me at all. I mean, I steal as much as I can. And we just had, at the end of the sermon, I'd say a prayer, and I would just go into, hey, if you want to accept Christ, pray this prayer: Dear Father, I confess that I'm a sinner. I ask for the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. Thank you for saving me from my sin. Amen. Hey, if you prayed that prayer, raise your hand. And at the end of the prayer, when you exit the auditorium, there's a sign back there that says, I raise my hand. There's some white bags on the table. There's some resources in there to help you. Nobody's going to ask you for your name. There's not even anybody at the table. Just walk by, pick up a white bag, and begin to read the information inside. And we'll see you next Sunday as you continue to grow and learn.
Yeah. Now, did you have multiple other additional, side ministries, men's discipleship, women's discipleship, those sorts of things that people would get plugged into?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. The very first church I pastored, we had adult Sunday school. After that, I never had adult Sunday school again.
You didn't like it?
No, it's not that I didn't like it. In fact, I liked it a lot. It creates a great social network where people get attached, and they'll attend church much more frequently because they have people that they get to talk to. They don't just have to listen to the talking head on Sunday morning. They get to get in a room with other believers and hammer through stuff. So I loved adult Sunday school. The issue became the church service outgrew the facility. And so, especially parking. And once you hit the parking barrier, you have to decide what's more important, inviting new people and sharing the gospel, or connecting those people. Because once you reach the capacity of your facility, you have no choice but to go buy more land and build bigger parking lots, or cancel adult Sunday school. One of the ways we canceled adult Sunday school was we started a Thursday morning adult Sunday school for people who were retired or weren't working. Mm-hmm. And so we would do we'd get together, we'd sing a couple songs, have an icebreaker, make some announcements, break off into 4 or 5 seminars. I taught one, the associate pastor taught one, other people taught them. And we had our adult Sunday school on Thursday morning.
Yeah, that's one way to solve the problem until you can get into a bigger building.
Well, and it's a lot more fun as well. I like teaching adult Sunday school. I like that far better than preaching. And so getting in a room with 20, 30, 40 adults and talking practical theology of how to live life is a lot of fun.
Oh, no doubt. And I'm sure that was the more the adult Sunday school. I don't think I've seen a church that has it. I mean, I've heard of it, but I've never been a part of a church that actually has it. But that's like you said, that's the theological groundwork. That's where you're really diving in. And it's, it's more than just what you're preaching on a Sunday morning. You're getting a little deeper.
Yeah. And small groups have replaced that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think small groups has replaced that. Mm-hmm. I think I had a friend, one of my mentors, who took a church from 50 to 1,500 in the Chicago area. And he said, I want people to attend, how did he do it? The congregation was Sunday morning worship. That was celebration was Sunday morning worship. Congregation was adult Sunday school, and cell was their small group. And so his church said, I want 3 hours of your time a week to do these 3 things. And that's a kind of a traditional evangelical church approach from, 7,500 years ago. Yeah. And with the whole advent of, commuting and parking lots and all that stuff, that middle section of congregation and adult Sunday school got canceled just because of the lack of facilities to do it with larger churches. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing when you see churches growing like that and just the work that God is doing. It's phenomenal. So was Gateway the third church you were at?
Fourth.
Okay, so there was another one in there. You were at the 125-year-old Baptist church, the 150-year-old Baptist, and let me guess, the 175-year-old Baptist church.
Well, the first church I pastored was in Auburn in the foothills of Sacramento, and I was asked to come plant a church in San Jose. So I planted a church in San Jose called Westgate.
Oh, real quick, let's talk about that. What did that look like?
There was a church in a really, really expensive area of the Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And the church had gone through the normal lifespan issue. And now their children were attending the church, but their children were having children and they were driving too far. They all lived in a less expensive area of San Jose. So the church in the expensive area said, let's go plant a church for our kids in the other area.
Mhm.
And so the church sponsored a church plant, and I became the pastor of that church plant.
Okay, so
And
you had already some committed families ready to go to that church when you went there.
well, not only that, we approached a church in our association that was just kind of sputtering along. They had a facility and property, but the church was not really growing and had some dysfunctional things. And so I was asked to approach the pastor by our executive director. And so Steve and I got together and talked, and we approached his church and said, "How would you guys like to close down, donate your facility to us, and we'll bring 100 people. You have about 100 people. We'll bring the two groups together, and we'll start a whole new church, and we'll call it Westgate Church."
Mhm.
And so I preached there a couple times, and the church decided to do it. We went in and gutted the place, took out the pews, turned the church sideways for a more amphitheater kind of feel, and started Westgate Church in 1993. We had about 200 people. We used doorknob hangers.
Mhm.
Our goal was to hang up 73,000 doorknob hangers in a 3-mile radius around the church because there were 73,000 front doors. And through a couple of Saturday groups we got together, we managed to hang up 55,000 doorknob hangers, and we had 653 people come to our first service.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it was wild. It was really wild.
It's so
And
awesome to hear about ministry like that, in city life sort of area versus where we're at in small town Idaho, and just the way that God works in different places is amazing.
well, and I think the issue is people that don't attend church have needs. And so our doorknob hanger said, the greatest needs for young families today are couples communicating well, having great parenting skills, learning how to get their finances under control and getting out of debt. We took the 5 hot buttons and we put those on a doorknob hanger and went and hung it up and said, come to Westgate, we're going to start answering these questions on this date. And so people came.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we did a lot of evangelism. We had I think our average attendance the first year was about 400.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
But a lot of those people, had not been in church in years or never before. And, if you scratch where people itch, no matter where they are, they'll come hear what you have to say if someone invites them.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Here's an interesting thing. This is really interesting to me. I hope you find it interesting.
Oh, I'm sure I will.
But I went to Boston, right, to Gordon Conwell. Did my Doctor of Ministries degree there in preaching. So we went to a bunch of churches in New England, and I've never seen more boring places in all my life. I mean, we went to the largest church in Boston, tons of people, and I thought, this is the most boring place in the world. I don't know how these people get people to stay here and go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Then my son's in the Coast Guard. So he was in Tampa Bay, Florida. So I go to Tampa Bay to visit him. We go to church on Sunday. The pastor says, hey, come up to this room and meet me if you're new here. And I told my family, hey, I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to go meet the pastor. And so it was a church that was about 7 years old and it's just busting at the seams, right? So I go up to this room. There's nobody there but he and I. And I said, tell me the number one person you lead to Christ in Tampa Bay, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, you're going to find this hard to believe. And I said, try me. Millennials from New England. And I said, no, nobody can reach New Englanders. They're all closed. They're all spiritually, dead. New Englanders will never accept Christ. And he goes, that's the number one person we lead to Christ. And I said, well, tell me why they come to Tampa Bay and receive Christ and they don't receive Christ in Kennebunkport, Maine, or in Newburyport, Massachusetts. And he goes, have you been there? And I said, yep. And I know what my opinion is. And he said, church is boring up there. And I said, that's exactly what I found. It's boring and dead, and it lacks leadership of people that are excited about Christ. And and are doing dynamic music. They are they. It's just the churches, the pastors are dead to a large degree. I'm sure there's very faithful guys up there that are really good, but everywhere I went, I just found some of the most pitiful examples of church I've ever seen in my life.
And it seems like, I'm a millennial, and being in that generation, and I've gone to liturgical services like that, and it's very hard. It's hard to sing the songs. You don't really know where we're going with the song. You think once you get through the first stanza, you have it memorized, but then it's different words on the second line, and it's all just different. And it does make it difficult, and it makes it to where, the church is such a wide, beautiful thing. There's so many different areas of it, and it's amazing how different people want a different worship service, or they want, especially generationally.
Here's another story, because you guys, millennials, you're supposed to be all about liturgy, right? You're supposed to want to be looking for something deep. So we go down to Mariners Church in Southern California. Kent Beshore down there did $100 million renovation on Mariners down there. And he walked us through the architecture, why they did what they did, and all this stuff. Off to one side of the campus, enormous campus, there's a church chapel that they built out of raw redwood with stained windows and candles and notches to put your written prayers out. And he said, we spent, and I can't remember the exact number, don't hold me to this, but like $10 million of this $100 million renovation. We spent $10 million building this chapel for these millennials that want this liturgical style. And we have invited and invited and invited, and every Sunday we'll have 7 people in that room.
Oh man, those millennials, you just can never rein them in.
Well, people are people, and nobody likes boredom.
Yeah.
And that liturgical service, I'm sorry, it's boring.
Yeah.
And no, the people that go in there, they want silence, and that's what they get. And he said it was the biggest waste of money they'd ever spent. Maybe it's changed now, but when we were there, he said he wished he had never done it.
Well, I'm sure that hopefully they would, all the money they invested into that they would find a way to at least somehow revive that building and be able to use it for something glorifying to God.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they'll do something with it. Yeah, but they were still trying, and they'd been doing it for over a year.
Man, those stories, I do find those stories fascinating and interesting, and it's refreshing to hear that perspective because, on this podcast, I talk to guys from a lot of different denominations and different forms and styles of worship and things like that. And it is refreshing to hear that there's big movements happening with the modern church, and that good things still happen all over the place. And a lot of, if you get all your information off of social media, you're probably not getting all your information correct. So, when people are saying, oh, well, the young people are going so far liturgical that they're becoming Eastern Orthodox or whatever, and you start to see that trend on social media, the reality is you have to ask yourself, okay, how much of that is really true? How many of them are really?
I'm sorry, I just don't believe it.
Once something starts trending on the algorithm, that's, you just see it over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, people that were, I had people in my church that were raised in the Armenian Orthodox Church in the Visalia region. And so they would go back to church once in a while to see family, or because they enjoyed certain Lent or certain, seasons or certain services, and they would go back because it was familiar to them. They grew up with it. I had a secretary, an office manager when I was in San Jose who came from a Catholic background. And one Good Friday, she said, I need to ask you a question. And I said, okay. She goes, promise me you won't fire me. And I said, no, I'm not going to fire you. And she said, I want to go to the Good Friday service at the Catholic Church because I love the Good Friday service. And it just feeds me, and I just want to go. And I said, you feel like you need to ask me that, whether you can attend that or not? Go. Take the day off and go do it. people that grow up in that format oftentimes want to go back and relive some of it
of
because
course.
it just resides, in their soul in some way. And they find a connection with God through it that I don't find because I don't have that background or tradition. But I just don't think, Warren Wiersbe, he used to say, we have the most exciting, electric, powerful book on the planet, and your job on Sunday morning as you teach it is not to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think oftentimes we kill it, and I think our music is boring and dull, and there just has to be life.
Yeah.
There just has to be life.
I love hearing it. And so I want to spend a few minutes before we finish up talking about, what you do now, life after pastoring. How long were you at Gateway for?
It's over. There's nothing.
That's it. You're retired, and now you just talk to millennials on podcasts. That's your
I
life.
wash dishes and take the car to the car wash.
That's living the dream right there.
Oh yeah,
So,
that was a big decision.
I'm sure that was probably not an easy one either. How you were there? How many years were you at Gateway?
12.
Okay, so you 12 years. You've got 30 plus years of pastoring, and then stepping away from that is not. I'm sure definitely not an easy decision.
Everything was going great. I had gotten a couple of raises the last 5 years. I was making more money than I ever made in my whole entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was going great. We had just finished our third stewardship campaign. Building program was winding up. Nobody asked me to leave. Everybody seemed relatively happy. I was enjoying it, but I watched a guy. I was 66 and a half years old when I retired. I watched a guy pastor till he was 75, and I watched his church drop by 50%. And I went, I do not want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything wrong. There was no immorality or anything, and I had to leave. There was nothing that disqualified me from ministry. I looked at my age, and I looked at the next generation, and I specifically hired an associate pastor 4 years before that I felt could take my place. He wasn't as strong an associate pastor as he was a senior pastor. And I knew because of his ambition, he was 30 years younger than me. And I knew because of his calling and desire and ambition, he was not going to hang around forever. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be a senior pastor. I felt like he could handle the responsibilities. He did great for 4 years. I put him through a 1-year vetting process with a kind of a candidating team. So the team would read a book and then do an interview with him. And then 3 months later, they were reading another book, doing an interview. So we did 4 interviews over a year with him. We told the church we were in this process, that I was going to retire, that the date was not in stone yet. And if we didn't want to go forward with this process, and we discovered that over the course of the year, I would stay another year, and we would transition, maybe to a traditional pulpit committee and start looking for someone. Mm-hmm. But it went great, and Lance became the senior pastor. I chose the date that I retired and came up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because my daughter lives in Spokane, just a few miles down the road, and she had a baby. And my wife said, "Well, if we're going to retire, we're moving." Yeah, because I now have a grandson, and I'm going to go play with him. And so I said, "Okay, let's do it. Let's go. Let's retire." And so I chose to step away because I really felt it was in the best interest of the church. And they were very gracious and very supportive, gave me a great retirement. And now I'm up here. I'm working with an organization called Mission Northwest, and I'm doing a little coaching and consulting with some younger guys.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. We just created this thing with Mission Northwest where I'm raising a little bit of support, and because up here you have a lot of small churches in a lot of small areas. And
so real quick, just unpack a little bit about what Mission Northwest is. Exactly what it is.
It's the old American Baptist organization. American Baptist denomination has moved toward a more liberal view of
Wokeness.
sexuality and other issues. So Mission Northwest is still a little bit connected with them, but they're changing, and I can't tell you all the stuff that's going on. I don't even know all the stuff that's going on, but they're forming this group to keep these churches on a solid evangelical foundation.
Okay,
and
good.
So I'm working with them, and a lot of small churches, a lot of pastors don't get sabbaticals. I got a couple of sabbaticals that were really helpful to me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to begin to share with small churches. If you would like a 4 to 6 week sabbatical, Ed will come in and pastor your church for 4 to 6 weeks, address any issues you feel like it would be appropriate for him to address. And you can take your sabbatical. Ed doesn't want to be the pastor of your church. He wants to be done after 6 weeks. And you come back and you get a nice sabbatical. You don't have to pay for it. Doesn't cost you anything. Mission Northwest pays for it.
Wow.
So I've raised a little support in order to do that.
So what do you see when and you go into these churches and this thing you're talking about before of when you left the church and they're bringing in a new pastor? You see that there are definitely struggles when a new pastor is transitioning into a position of a church. I'm sure you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you? Yeah. You see. So you counsel the congregation through this. You counsel the elders, or you try to come in and assist the church in embracing their new pastor and loving on him and trusting. Yeah, that's really good. That's really helpful. I mean, there's no shortage of churches that probably need that.
Yeah, when Lance and I were transitioning, he was transitioning into my spot. I'd been preaching for 35 years. Lance had not preached every Sunday ever.
Mm-hmm.
He had been an associate his whole life, but he has great leadership skills. He's got a great biblical mind and heart, and he wants to make decisions based on Scripture and the leadership of the Holy Spirit of God in his heart and soul as to what the church needs. He's a good decision maker. And so I told the church at one point, I said, some of you guys are talking about, well, Pastor Ed's been preaching for 30 years and he's got great depth, and this guy hasn't, and he's not going to have great depth. Mm-hmm. And so I just got up and said, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And if you want to see him not develop depth over the next couple of decades, criticize him.
Yeah.
Go ahead and criticize him, and you'll kill his preaching desire. Or you can find the good and look for the good in what he says and what he teaches, and you can compliment him on that, and you can watch him grow and flourish and become, the next great pastor of Gateway Church. And whereas I got to stay 12 years, Lance at 36 years of age, he can be here for 30 years. Mm-hmm. You could have the longest, because the church had a lot of pastors. I was their 47th pastor, I think.
Wow.
And I got third place. Yeah. There were 2 pastors that stayed longer than me, so I only got a bronze medal.
Hey, at least you got a medal.
I said, Lance can just outlive me right out of the medal, contingent, and become the gold medalist to Gateway Church. He could be here 30 years, and you guys could just watch him blossom and do well, and it's up to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, transitioning people around in churches, especially in pastoral positions, it's hard because you got to get somewhere and develop relationships, and that takes time. And churches, if we're going to be real, churches are tribal, and so it can be very difficult for not just the pastor but for the congregation, and it takes work on both sides.
Yeah, there's part of the issue is you just got to ask those tribes to be committed to a chief, be committed to a leader. And so I kind of always tried to invade those tribes that I could identify and attempt to, win them over. I mean, I had guys say to me when I became the pastor, we've seen pastors come and go and we're going to outlive you. And, what a bad attitude.
Yeah.
But, you just smile and be as gracious as you can and do the work of ministry, invite people, lead people to Christ, baptize people, marry people, bury people. The most meaningful times I've ever spent with people is at a funeral service. I'd rather do a funeral than a wedding any day of the week because people need you and they want to hear what you have to say. And, you need to walk into those situations and hopefully speak some biblical words that give them a little bit of an eternal perspective.
Yeah. Wow. That's sobering to be reminded that even the Bible says it's better to go to the house of mourning or the people who are mourning than the house where they're feasting and laughing.
Yeah. Mr. Biblicist.
Yeah. I'm Calvary Chapel. So Calvary Chapel does pride itself on the fact that they teach the whole Bible, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And
that's what I loved about Talbot. Talbot's the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a blessing, it's a blessing for all of us as Christians, not just pastors, but everybody who's in the church, that God has preserved his word for us and we get to celebrate around it every week when we come together.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Well, Ed, I appreciate your time. So I want to ask, let's say one last question to wrap this up. If let's do something for the young married couple, since I'm a young married couple. We're going on 7 years. So they say that the 7-year mark is the good mark to be at.
It is.
That's at least the first good mark to be at. So in all your years of marriage counseling, which you've done plenty, I'm sure, what do you think number one problem is that you see? I know there's a multitude of problems. Yeah. In marriages. In
ministry couples or just in marriage in general?
Maybe both.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think it necessarily matters, but it's always the most tension is caused by finances. The second greatest tension is caused by children. And the third greatest tension is caused by selfishness. And so finances, I was really, really fortunate. And I married a gal who does not have a degree in finance. She does not have a licensed CPA certificate hanging on her wall. She is by nature a bookkeeper and a CPA. And she handles money better than anybody that I've ever met. And I graduated from seminary, knew friends that were in debt, and we had money saved up so we could buy our first house. I mean, we just were really, really, really conservative with our finances. We always gave. Every church I've ever been a part of, I've been in the top 5% of givers as the pastor. We were very faithful to that. Again, you model what you ask people for. And it's biblical, again. And so you got to get, whether it's, what's his name, Dave Ramsey, whether it's his method or somebody else's. Yeah. You got to control your finances. And the one thing Cindy and I always did is we always went to at least one and sometimes two pastors' retreats a year together. Yeah. And spent time together. One was over in Monterey and one was up at Hume Lake. They had a pastor's retreat. Cindy's parents would come and babysit the kids. In fact, we were really worried. Brand new parents. We're going to leave our kids for the very first time with Gramsy and Papa. And we're going to go away for 3 nights, 4 days, 3 nights at Hume Lake for their pastor's retreat. No phone, no nothing. And we're really worried. Oh, how will the kids do? Nick is 4, Jenna's 2.5. Oh, what's going to happen? It's going to be terrible. They're going to be so lonely. They're going to miss us. We walk into Gramsy and Papa's house after being gone for 4 days. My son and my daughter are sitting on Gramsy's good couch with towels in their laps, eating Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars.
Oh, they're partying.
Yeah. They're watching cartoons. I open the door, walk in, I'm looking, Nick's about, 20 feet away, and I go, "Hi, son." And he looks over at me and he goes, "We don't have to go home yet, do we, Dad?" And I
Guess you
went,
could have
"Oh,
stayed for another week.
good to see you too, son. I'm so glad you missed me." So, we had Tom and Diesta. Cindy and I used to go visit people that visited our church on Tuesday night. Tom and Diesta would come to our house, and they were our adopted grandparents because Cindy's parents lived further away. We couldn't get there that easily. So we adopted Tom and Diesta. They came over every Tuesday night, babysat our kids while we went out and visited visitors from the church.
Mm-hmm.
And they loved Tom and Diesta. They just had a great time with them.
That's awesome.
So spend time, find ways to carve out time. You might not call that a real great date night, going and doing, some visiting on a Tuesday night, but Cindy and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And if you want people to invite people to church, follow up on their friends. They appreciate it.
Yeah. And you're living out the model. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I appreciate your time, Ed, and I'm glad that you're living your best life in retirement now and just doing all those good things.
I'm a phenomenal pickleball player, man. I'm telling you, I'm just killing it.
That's I've had some conversations about pickleball. I haven't stepped on the court yet. I call it intimidation. I'm not sure what you want to call it, but something. I got to get out there and do it.
Come to Coeur d'Alene and visit us and we'll play.
For sure. Oh, we will one of these days. That's definitely a must. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be blessed. We talked about a lot of good, refreshing things that everybody needs to hear. So I'm really excited to release this episode. So we'll talk to you soon. And again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you.